It's the lead story on the front page of the New York Times. This was February 2010. Dramatic headline. Secret joint raid captures Taliban's top commander. Right? A1, front page headline in the Times. U.S. says Pakistan cooperated to bring in group's second most influential man. This was February 2010. The Pakistani intelligence service, the ISI, arrested a man named Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. Baradar was a founding member of the Taliban, widely considered to be the mastermind of the Taliban's military operations, both as a kind of wide-angle strategist, but also as a day-to-day commander of Taliban fighters. His leadership was considered so important to the Taliban's success on the battlefield that the Times said at the time of his arrest that him being captured could cripple the Taliban's military operations. But they did get him in 2010. And of course, that was only about halfway through America's long war against the Taliban in Afghanistan. But Mullah Baradar was, in 2010, put into a Pakistani prison. It was a joint operation between U.S. intelligence and Pakistani intelligence. They picked him up. And in practical terms, that means ultimately he was locked up in Pakistan, essentially at the request of the U.S. government. The CIA directly assisted in the raid in Pakistan that put him behind bars. Which is why 10 years later, 10 years after his imprisonment at the request of the U.S. government, it really did take your breath away to see that very same guy, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, co-founder of the Taliban, standing side by side with American Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, welcomed in that same ceremonial, honorific way that the U.S. welcomes its allies. It was a meeting that would have been impossible had it not been for an unusual intervention by the Trump administration 2 years prior in 2018. In 2018, the Trump White House quietly arranged for Baradar to be released from prison in Pakistan so he could participate in talks, so he could be at the Afghan peace talks between the Taliban and the United States government under the Trump administration. They are the ones who sprung him from prison. And that is how we got the remarkable image of America's most senior diplomat and the co-founder of the Taliban standing there shoulder to shoulder. It was also the reason that Mullah Baradar was able to re-enter Afghanistan last week for the first time in over a decade as the de facto leader of Afghanistan, now that the Taliban has taken control. The Washington Post reporting that he was escorted into the country in a fleet of white SUVs. He was treated to a fireworks display on his road back to power. The Trump administration letting Mullah Baradar out of prison also paved the way for this remarkable scoop today in the Washington Post, that the director of the CIA, William Burns, held a secret meeting in Afghanistan with Mullah Baradar yesterday. And what the Post notes was a meeting tinged with irony, given that it was the CIA that picked him up and helped put Baradar in prison 11 years ago. Joining us now is John Hudson. He's a national security reporter for the Washington Post who first broke this remarkable story today. Mr. Hudson, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Great to be with you, Rachel.
First, let me ask you if I got any of that wrong, and if sort of tinged with irony is the right way to explain it. This must be a sort of an unsettling moment for the CIA and its leadership.
That was a perfect way to characterize what was an extraordinary tete-a-tete on Monday. It's hard to imagine more of a full circle event where you have a man who literally spent 8 years in a Pakistani prison because of the CIA, the spy agency that worked with the Pakistanis to arrest him, as he said, standing next to the top director of the CIA as equals, meeting and hashing out the future of Afghanistan. And it's important to remember there were many times with which the United States could negotiate with the Taliban over 20 years of war in Afghanistan. But in this meeting, this was not a place where the U.S. had leverage. And it's after the Taliban came in and took over the country with maximum leverage. So that is an incredible full circle event where you go from being locked in a Pakistani prison to then meeting the director of the CIA as your equal in a diplomatic meeting.
Yeah, it is remarkable. And of course, it happens at this moment where time is very short for U.S. forces, and the United States is trying to do trying to accomplish huge things in a very short remaining period of time in terms of the end of this airlift and evacuation effort. I mean, Bill Burns is a very, very, very seasoned Foreign Service officer and diplomat. Should we see this meeting today as a means of trying to keep open a high-level channel of communication, in part to facilitate these next few days in Afghanistan with what the U.S. is trying to do in its evacuation efforts?
Yes, I think you should see it that way. I think we should see this as a sense of the urgency and the importance with which President Biden is taking the issue of getting Americans and getting Afghan allies out of Afghanistan. He is relying on the one individual in his cabinet who is the most decorated Foreign Service officer, veteran, experienced diplomat in generations. Before he became confirmed as director of CIA, he was Deputy Secretary of State. He's been U.S. Ambassador to Russia. He served over multiple administrations, Republican and Democrat, and is almost universally well-liked in Washington, not because he plays the game and is overly, obsequious with people, but because he is extraordinarily intelligent, extraordinarily competent. And so it was interesting to see Biden reach out to him in this moment, because for sure, this is actually a sort of diplomatic capacity with which he's talking. They're negotiating over this evacuation. Unusual for a CIA officer to be in that position, and a CIA director. But that's what he was using him for. But it does really go to his strengths over so many years in government service.